Most furries know this by now, but one of the earliest things that you do when you join the furry fandom is create a persona for yourself. These characters give furries a way to express how they would look in a world filled with anthropomorphic animals. And from choosing a species to what color fur they should have, there's a lot that goes into making a persona, and is something that many furries will take their time with to ensure that they get it just right. And while every part of the persona creation process is important, there is one aspect of every persona that takes on some extra meaning, but in many cases is actually the hardest to come up with: the name. What you call your persona is extremely important to the overall design, but can also be a point of frustration when trying to figure out what to choose for it. And that point of frustration is what we're going to try and make a little easier today. Let's look at why your persona name is so important, how you can make coming up with a name a simpler process, and how doing so really gives your persona a real identity in this fandom. Making a persona is one of the most important aspects of being a member of the furry fandom. It not only gives everyone in this fandom a chance to express how they would look if they were an anthropomorphic animal, but also gives everyone a sense of identity in the fandom as well. But because no two personas are exactly the same, everyone has something that makes them unique and allows for individualism in such a large fandom. And while that uniqueness really shines in the design of everyone's personas, they honestly don't mean all that much if we have no way of knowing what each of those personas was called. So furries give them names, which may seem like an obvious thing to do, but it actually carries on a surprising amount of importance. One of the cool things about being a furry is that we don't call each other by our real names. We are all known by the names of our personas, and we do it so often that our furry names stick with us, even outside of doing furry things in the fandom. For example, when I hang out with my friends that I met in the furry fandom IRL, we still call each other by our furry names, even if everyone else around us isn't furries. And that's what makes choosing a name such a core part of the overall point of making a persona, which allows us to have the choice of how we want to be seen and how we want to be called in the context of the furry fandom. But it's still a choice that has to be made, and for new furries just joining the fandom, it can be a lot more difficult than it may seem. For many furs, coming up with the design of their persona is actually a pretty straightforward process. There are only so many animals to choose from, and a lot of people end up just choosing their favorite animal or a combination of their favorites. And even while designing it, there are only a few primary and secondary colors to work with. And again, many people end up choosing their favorite colors or colors that naturally complement each other. Or they just pick blue and call it a day because they couldn't be bothered doing something different for a change. However, unlike the technically limited amount of choices that you have when creating the design of your persona, when it comes to the name, there's virtually no limit on what you can choose. There are truly no rules on what you can name your persona. They don't have to be anything similar to the names of real people. They can literally be anything from the names of different types of weather, a certain sound that you might like, or words in different languages. Heck, they don't even have to be words. There's a bunch of furries out there that have numbers as their names, meaning that technically there's actually an infinite amount of names that you can choose from. So how could you possibly choose amongst the seemingly endless amount of names that you could give to your persona and pick one that works for you and your character? Well, what I and a lot of other furries end up doing involves choosing one of three options, a process that I like to refer to as the persona name decision framework. The first thing that you could do to choose your persona name is just let it come to you. I know this might not make all that much sense, but a lot of the names of people's personas are ones that they just picked out of thin air. Now, to help with finding that inspiration when you're designing your persona, I find it helpful to actually choose the name of your persona last. By waiting until everything else about your persona is decided, you would have actually developed a little bit of a relationship with that persona that you're designing, and something might come up in your head that makes sense for your character after spending a lot of time with it as you came up with its design. It could be a particular thing that your persona likes or does, or it might be the first thing you feel after you're finally happy with the design. Either way, sometimes just waiting for the right one to come to you can make for the best persona names. Secondly, if you're like me and actually like a little bit more structure in the name deciding process, another large source of inspiration can come by choosing something related to you as a person or your persona as a character. A lot of furries choose something that they can relate to in real life to incorporate into the name of their fursona. This can be an activity that they like to do, a food that they like to eat, or something that made a big impression on them while they were young. That last part is actually how I chose my fursona name. You see, the name Finn actually started off with just one N, and that's because when I was growing up, my favorite animals were dolphins. When I was younger, I thought dolphins were so cute and admired how smart they were and got really obsessed with learning as many facts about dolphins that I could learn. Now, this was all before I realized that dolphins are actually vicious creatures and do some diabolical things to other sea creatures for fun, and once I found out about all that stuff, I needed a little bit of change in branding. But when I became a furry myself, I still wanted to preserve a little bit of that legacy of the first animal that I truly became fond of, and eventually took the second half of the name of the animal and tweaked it to make it look like a standard name. Now, obviously the backstory of your fursona name doesn't have to be nearly that in-depth, but a lot of times the best inspiration comes from your own personal experience. And finally, if neither of those options end up working for you, you can simply leave it up to chance. There are a bunch of resources out there that can generate a fursona name for you, and you don't even have to use those. Just general name generators can help you choose what you call your fursona. Now, I personally think that this should be used as a last resort because technically, someone or something else is choosing a core part of something that is supposed to represent how you want to be seen in the fandom. But sometimes having a third party come up with the name for you can be just as effective as choosing it yourself. Oh, and you can always use the names that are generated as inspiration themselves, change something about that name that they come up with, and put your own spin on it. And while by no means is this an exhaustive list, I have found that these 3 ways are the most effective ways of coming up with a name for your fursona. Now, even though we just spent a bunch of time talking about how important your name is, I do want to say that this process should be fun, not stressful. Yes, names are important, but there's no perfect set of names that works for everyone. It's all about choosing what works best for you, just like the rest of your fursona. But your name is something you do want to be happy with, as that is how you're going to be referred to by everyone in this fandom. It's different from something like naming a child, where you don't know anything about them until after their name is chosen. You have full control over your fursona and can choose each and every detail about its design. But think about how cool that is for a second. You now also have full control over how you want to be presented in this fandom, something that you rarely get the chance to do in real life. And of course, if all else fails, you can always change your name down the line. So yeah, be confident in the name of your fursona, because you're not just choosing a new name for your character, you're also choosing a new name for yourself. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one, but until then, stay wild out there. Peace.